God calls Abraham, a journey of faith and obedience. The divine call. In the peaceful land of Haran, Abraham lived with his wife Sarah, his family, and many animals. Life was simple and quiet, filled with daily routines and the warmth of community. The sun shone brightly in the sky, and a gentle breeze moved through the tents as Abraham watched over his flocks grazing in the distance. Everything seemed calm and ordinary, but one day, the extraordinary happened. Suddenly, a voice unlike any other filled Abraham's heart. It wasn't a human voice, it was powerful, yet gentle, commanding, yet full of love. It was the voice of God. Abraham, leave your home, your land, and your family. Go to the place I will show you. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless your name, and your descendants will be a blessing to the entire world. Abraham froze. His heart raced as the weight of this call sank in. He knew that following God's voice would mean stepping into the unknown. Yet, deep in his soul, he felt an unshakable trust. He turned to Sarah and said, "God has spoken. We must leave." Startled, Sarah asked, "Where will we go?" With faith shining in his eyes, Abraham replied, "I don't know, but God does." Hi there, I'm Kimberly Swan, and I'm so glad you're here with us today. Welcome to my friend Jesus. In this space, we share inspiring stories of faith, hope, and love, just like the incredible journey of Abraham we're exploring right now. I'd love for you to join our growing community by subscribing and becoming part of our family of faith. Here's something I'd love for you to do. In the comments, share this simple but powerful phrase to inspire others. I will trust God, even when I don't see the way. Let's encourage one another as we walk together in faith. The first journey. The next morning, Abraham and Sarah began packing their belongings. Their tent, their few household items, and the supplies for the journey were carefully prepared. Their servants helped gather the flocks of sheep and camels. Everything they owned was being moved toward an unknown destination. Sarah looked around one last time at the land she had always called home. "We're really leaving," she whispered to herself. The road ahead was harsh. The sun blazed down on them as they crossed endless stretches of desert. The days were long, and the nights were cold. Each step seemed heavier than the last, but Abraham's heart remained steady. He clung to the words of God, replaying them in his mind, "I will make you into a great nation." One evening, after they had pitched their tent and lit a small fire, Abraham sat under the vast, starry sky. He gazed up, mesmerized by the countless points of light. God's voice stirred in his heart again, "Look at the stars, Abraham. So shall your descendants be." Beside him, Sarah sat quietly. "How can this be?" she asked. "We don't even have a child." Abraham took her hand gently and said, "We must trust him." Waiting for the promise. Years passed as Abraham and Sarah wandered from place to place, always trusting God to guide them. Yet, as time went on, the promise of descendants seemed increasingly impossible. Abraham was already growing old, and Sarah was well past the age of bearing children. Doubts crept into their minds, but God continued to reaffirm his promise. One day, Sarah, in her impatience, proposed a solution. "Perhaps the promise will come through another way," she suggested. She offered her servant, Hagar, to Abraham, and Hagar gave birth to a son named Ishmael. But God gently reminded Abraham that Ishmael was not the son of the promise. Then, something extraordinary happened. 3 travelers appeared near Abraham's tent. Recognizing them as messengers from God, Abraham rushed to greet them and prepared a meal. As they ate, one of the men turned to Abraham and said, "By this time next year, Sarah will have a son." From inside the tent, Sarah overheard and laughed to herself. "Me? Have a child at my age? That's impossible." But the man said, "Why did Sarah laugh? Is anything too hard for the Lord?" Sarah was silent, her heart stirred by the reminder of God's power. The promise was not forgotten. The birth of the promise. A year later, just as God had promised, something miraculous happened. Sarah, once barren and now advanced in age, gave birth to a baby boy. Abraham held the child in his arms, tears streaming down his face as he whispered, "His name will be Isaac, for he is the laughter God brought into our lives." The household was filled with joy and celebration. Laughter and songs echoed through the tents as everyone marveled at the miracle. Sarah cradled Isaac close to her chest and said, "Who would have thought that I, in my old age, would bear a son? But God has made me laugh, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me." Isaac grew into a bright and joyful child, a constant reminder of God's faithfulness. Abraham and Sarah often watched him play, filled with gratitude for the promise fulfilled. Yet, in their hearts, they knew Isaac was more than just their son. He was the beginning of a great plan, God's covenant to bless all nations through Abraham's family. This was only the start of something far greater than they could imagine. But their journey of faith was not over. A greater test still awaited Abraham. The ultimate test. Years passed, and Isaac grew into a strong and bright young boy. Abraham cherished every moment with him, knowing he was the child of the promise. But one day, God called Abraham again. This time, the command was almost unbearable. "Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you." Abraham's heart ached, but his faith in God remained unshaken. Early the next morning, he saddled his donkey, took Isaac and 2 servants, and set off for Moriah. The journey was quiet and heavy with emotion. On the 3rd day, Abraham saw the mountain in the distance. He told the servants to stay behind and walked on with Isaac. "Father," Isaac said, "we have the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the sacrifice?" Abraham's voice trembled as he replied, "God himself will provide the lamb." On the mountaintop, Abraham built an altar and placed Isaac on it. As he raised the knife, an angel of the Lord called out, "Abraham, do not harm the boy. Now I know that you fear God." Abraham looked up and saw a ram caught in a thicket. Overwhelmed with relief, he sacrificed the ram instead. Abraham named the place "The Lord will provide," and God reaffirmed his promise, "Through your descendants, all nations on earth will be blessed because you have obeyed me." As Abraham and Isaac descended the mountain together, their faith had been tested and strengthened. The promise was secure, and Abraham knew that God was always faithful. The story of Abraham is one of extraordinary faith, obedience, and trust in God. From the moment he left his homeland to follow God's call, through years of waiting for the promise, to the ultimate test of offering Isaac, Abraham's journey shows us that faith requires courage, patience, and surrender. But it also shows us something even greater: God is always faithful to his promises. Abraham's life reminds us that trusting in God, even when we don't understand his plans, leads to blessings beyond what we could ever imagine. His story is not just about one man's journey, it's about God's plan to bless the entire world through Abraham's descendants, a plan fulfilled through Jesus Christ. Hi again, I'm Kimberly Swan, and thank you for joining us today on My Friend Jesus. Abraham's story reminds us that trusting in God can take us through challenges we never imagined, but it also leads to blessings beyond anything we could dream of. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to become part of our community by subscribing to the channel and sharing this journey with others. And here's a thought to leave in the comments: God's promises never fail. Let's fill this space with faith and encouragement, lifting each other up as we grow closer to our friend Jesus. See you in the next story.